So I know I'm the only thing between you and your coffee now, so I'll try and make it as quick as possible. My name is Michael Guerin. I'm the Programme Manager of Smart Docklands, which is, as John has said, our Smart City testbed in Dublin. So this will be a slightly different perspective to a lot of the presentations you've heard this morning. A lot of them have been building focused. This is a lot of the perspective, I suppose, on the area around the building. We will talk a little bit about buildings as well. But first of all, what is a smart city? Is it flying cars over Poolbeg, or is it skyscrapers in Grand Canal Dock? I hope nobody from the Dublin Chamber is here, because that's actually out of their video. But none of that is actually what a smart city is. That's all very futuristic. A smart city, it's a very long-winded definition, but it is quite simple. Smart city is about creating efficiencies to improve how a city functions, and it is just about efficiencies in cities. What is Smart Dublin then? Smart Dublin is an initiative of the 4 local authorities in Dublin, so Dublin City Council and then the 3 regional authorities. The idea being we want to drive as much smart city innovation to Dublin City and region. Some of the things we're working on, smart energy, smart buildings, connected health, real-time passenger information, smart bins, but you do see these infographics of smart cities all over the world. This stuff has actually arrived in Dublin. So you'll see the bin on the left-hand side there, big belly bins. It's a solar-powered bin that compresses the rubbish and lets the waste management team in Dublin City Council know when that bin is full. Dublin City Council has just deployed around 800 of them, I believe, around the city. And the idea being that instead of the waste management team going to every bin to check whether it's full every day, they just go to the 100 or 200 that actually need emptied. Then there's a route optimization app on top of that, so that the waste management team can plan the best route the best route is actually planned for them. Real-time passenger information, most of you will probably be aware of, telling you when the next bus is coming. It's important that the things we do aren't all smartphone driven, so that people from different backgrounds and of all ages can be part of the smart city. And Dublin Bikes. So Dublin Bikes is actually one of the most successful bike sharing schemes in the world. And on top of that, we have the Leap card in Dublin. So we have one contactless payment card that you can use on 5 modes of transport. That is actually quite significant. So people ask me all the time, when will Dublin be smart? Dublin actually is very smart already, and we are living in a smart city. A smart city, it isn't always about a futuristic city. We can always improve the city, but the city is getting smarter. And if we are living in a smart city, you won't really notice it happening. It'll just become part of your day-to-day. But within Dublin, those were the big solutions that come through procurement. They took years to get here, and what we wanted to do was be a little bit more agile, so we decided to create a test bed. And I think what we've acknowledged in Dublin is that we're big enough to validate solutions, but we're small enough to make things happen quickly. So we've assigned the Docklands area as the area that we'd like to test. For those of you who know Dublin, this is the area that we're looking at. It's about 2 square kilometres in the centre of Dublin, fast becoming the central business district. Some stats in the area then, there's 44,000 people employed there and 26,000 residents. 3 billion private investment from now until 2025. It's the Dublin City Council Strategic Development Zone. It contributes 9% of Ireland's GDP and home to over 500 businesses, some of which you will probably recognise. So you can see Google, I think they celebrated 15 years in Dublin just the other day. They have 8,000 staff in the Docklands. Facebook have 4,000 staff there. Deloitte have their EMEA blockchain hub. Airbnb have their innovation centre. Accenture have their smart building there. And because of all of these tech companies in one space, we decided to create the Smart Docklands Network. So we decided to create a network of all of these companies. Some of them are based in the Docklands, some of them aren't. But the idea being that they didn't have a way of working with the city. They have a lot of great city-based and smart city and big data projects, but they weren't working with Dublin. Although a lot of the work was being done in Dublin, they weren't working with Dublin. So we set up this network so that they had a way of working with the smart city and the teams within Dublin City Council. The idea being that all of these projects that they do in Vancouver and Sydney and Mumbai and all over the world, that they could and should be incorporating Dublin in some of them. And it's been very successful with most of these companies. But the Smart Docklands network, or IoT network, is just one part of the pie. This is the much bigger stakeholder network, and you don't need to worry too much about everyone that's here, but it's important to stress that this smart city piece cuts across a lot of different areas. So we have, and what we have within Smart Docklands is kind of a triple helix model. We have the industry, which is the tech companies, the small and big tech companies. We have research and academia. So our Smart Docklands is funded by Connect and Enable, the research centres, and then Dublin City Council. So as I mentioned, it's funded by Dublin City Council Connect and Enable, 50% funded by Dublin City Council, 50% funded by the research centres. And the idea being that nobody has too much control at any given time, and that we need all of these research, academia, city and industry if we want to make any progress within the city. But within Smart Docklands, we structure it in three ways. Connectivity being the most important piece to a smart city or a smart district, the use cases and projects on top of that, and the engagement. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of these. Connectivity is a baseline to everything we do. To be a true smart city testbed, we wanted to have as many layers of connectivity as possible. So some of these you will recognise, some of them you won't. We've low-powered wide area networks, which are essentially networks that are used for IoT devices. So we have full coverage of LoRa, Sigfox and NB-IoT, which are three different types of networks, all used for small sensors. It's small amounts of data that go up and down on these networks, so it's very different to a cellular network that uses a SIM card. Because it's small amounts of data, these sensors can be deployed for 5 to 10 years with a battery, so they don't need to be connected to power, which means you can deploy them in much more difficult and harsh environments. Cellular coverage, we obviously have 3G and 4G. We're working on some 5G trials, Wi-Fi and dark fibre, which I'll talk a little bit about now. But I suppose the point of this, and the most important piece, we've heard a lot of conversations this morning about BIM, about AR, VR, different technologies that are required on construction sites. None of this is actually, and the connection to the cloud, which is very important, none of that's actually possible unless all of the connectivity is there. So it's great in theory to have all of this stuff, but if you can't get signal on your phone, or if you can get signal and there's no capacity, then these technologies start to fall down. So for us to have all of these technologies in cities or around sites, we need to have the layers of connectivity there, and that's very important. So the two things I'm going to talk about very briefly is 5G and dark fibre. So dark fibre being fibre that isn't switched on. Dublin City Council have decided to deploy dark fibre in the Docklands area. This is a map of where it is. The idea being that if fibre is connected by one provider into a building, then that building owner is locked to that provider. This is a neutral host model, so you can choose the provider. And Dublin City Council, this being the area and the area where most of the tech companies are, it's important to have a good fibre infrastructure. The other thing we're looking at then with 5G is working with dense air. So we're deploying the world's first commercial grade 5G network. It's a world's first of its kind, I suppose. Dense Air have bought part of the 5G spectrum in Ireland. So the other network operators have bought a portion of the spectrum, as of Dense Air. They are not a network operator. Their idea is that they will deploy small cells. It's again a neutral host model. There's a number of things we're testing here. And just to give you a bit of background on this, so the way your phones work at the minute, they connect directly to a tower on the top of a building. There's around 5 or 6 of them in the Docklands area, and they can handle about 600 phones at a time. So as you can see, with the 44,000 people working there every day, that capacity isn't there. So the way these small cells work essentially is that if you have one tower that can connect to 600 things, if those 600 things are small cells that can connect to 50 things by themselves, then it spreads out the network, and the macro towers can now begin to handle much more phones in one area. So this is the type of deployment we're looking at, small cells on lampposts and on traffic lights, and then also small cells within buildings. This is the kind of existing setup in the Docklands, and you can see the pressure on the 3 macro sites in the middle. And whenever we deploy small cells, it'll look something like this. So as I said, deploying them on traffic lights and on public lighting columns. It's an interesting project for us. We are trialling a lot of things in this. Dublin City Council and the public lighting team in Dublin City Council don't want to have to, to give you a bit of background in this, connectivity in cities, because of the new materials that are being used in buildings, they're very energy efficient. They're great for the building owners and great for the tenants, but they're not good for connectivity, especially this new spectrum that we'll be using, 3.5 gigahertz. That doesn't travel as far and can't travel through these new materials. So we need to deploy small cells to have the levels of connectivity in a city. So that's the reason we're deploying these. Dublin City Council don't want small cells in every single lamppost. So we're trying to look at a neutral host model to see, is a lamppost now worth something to Dublin City Council? Should they be renting it? Should they be working with all the operators? How do we deploy things? There's a lot of regulatory issues we've got to overcome. So it's a 2-year trial to try and understand those problems. But as I said, then the connectivity is a very important piece to this. So on a quarterly basis, we track the types of connectivity we have in the Docklands. So the cellular, low-powered wide area networks, etc. not just what's deployed, but also how usable it is. There are a lot of networks out there, but they aren't necessarily easy to connect to. So what we're trying to do is get to a space where these networks, although they are there, they're very easy to tap into with different providers. Some of the use cases and projects I'll talk about on top of that then. So one of the networks I mentioned earlier was a LoRa network. So it's a low-powered wide area network. We're using this network to trial rainfall sensors. I know it's not the most glamorous thing in the world, but it is actually one of our more successful projects. The rainfall sensor you'll see on the left-hand side there is the one Dublin City Council use at the minute. The one on the right-hand side is a low-cost sensor. It's about 10% of the cost of the one on the left-hand side. And then when you put the radio and the connectivity on top of that, it becomes more efficient. So what we want to do, the sensor on the left-hand side needs to be connected to power and needs to have cellular signal. So there's a limit to the places you can put it. It's also very expensive to buy. The one on the right is much cheaper. It uses the LoRa network, which has much longer range. So we're trying to deploy, and they're also low cost, so we're trying to deploy several of these around Dublin city centre. What we want is to get hyper-local rainfall notifications. We'll then tie that into river level sensors, tidal sensors, and start to use that to predict flooding in Dublin. So we've actually just secured, this is actually some of the sites that we have them around Dublin. So we've 25 rainfall sensors at the minute, and 4 weather stations, and 10 river level sensors. We also have a number of gully sensors, again using the LoRa network. So most flooding happens in Dublin because the gullies are actually just blocked. And if Dublin City Council knows there's going to be a large amount of rainfall tomorrow and that the gullies in certain areas are blocked, they can go and clear them, which will reduce the amount of flooding in a city. So to build on this, we've secured another €800,000 worth of funding recently through Francesco Pila in UCD to deploy a large number of these sensors around Dublin. And if we have rainfall sensors in the Dublin mountains, river level sensors in the Dodder around the city, and if we know there's X amount of rainfall falling in the mountains, it's coming down at whatever speed, and the rivers are filling up at whatever speed, we know it's likely to flood in that area in the next 3 hours based on historical information, then we can either let businesses in the area know or residents in the area know. So that's the stage where we'd like to get to. Another project we have then is with a company called Think Smarter Analytics. So this is using Wi-Fi analytics for a number of different reasons. The first one we did was for an event. 2 reasons we wanted to do it: to try and determine the economic value of the event. So this event, the license is given to the event organiser by Dublin City Council based on the number of people turn up to the event. The number of people was given by the event organiser. So whenever we did this analysis, we actually realised there was 2 to 3 times more people turning up to the event than he actually said, which is hardly surprising. But the other thing to benefit, I suppose, the event organiser was there was a lot of complaints in the area about antisocial behaviour and damage to buildings. So using this type of technology, we could see that the event finished at midnight. By about 20 past 12:30, everybody had left the area, and all the phones and devices associated with the event had left the area, and it was new devices came into the area at 3 a.m. So although the damage was done, it wasn't the responsibility of the event organiser, and that they shouldn't be punished for it. So it's an interesting use of Wi-Fi, not necessarily one that people would think of, but because of that, we decided to expand the Wi-Fi network around Dublin. So we put up some access points around the Docklands. We started with Oktoberfest, and then we put different Wi-Fi access points across. So some of you will know that there are new bridges being built in Dublin. They probably won't be ready until about 2021, 2022. But what we need to do, I suppose, in advance of that, where Capital Dock is around Hanover Quay or St John Rocheson's Quay, there's going to be at least another 1,000 members of staff going in there from the start of 2019. It's a very difficult area to get in and out of, and what we wanted to do is see how we could get more people in and out. So using this type of analytics, we wanted to see if, in advance of the bridges being built, if we put a ferry system in, could we get people in and out of there quicker? So we actually determined that from just in front of the 3 Arena to where the new building will be is about a 26-minute walk, but actually only a 3-minute ferry service. So we're actually deploying the first ferry in about 2 weeks' time to try and move people in and out of the area quicker. Again, it's a use of Wi-Fi analytics that is slightly different to what you'd expect. Working with another company called Route for You then to map accessible routes in Dublin. So this is crowdsourcing of obstacles for people with different disabilities. The idea being that you can map a temporary obstacle or a permanent obstacle, or if a temporary obstacle like a cafe sign is there every day, it is temporary but it's becoming permanent, and Dublin City Council can start to do something about that. It also will then map, based on your ability, the best routes around Dublin. Another use case then is a trial with a C-Sense bike light. So this is a smart bike light. It's the largest smart bike light trial that's ever happened. There's 500 lights distributed in Dublin last year. We did partner a little bit with Google, which is why there's such a heat map going towards Barrow Street there. There was a lot of people involved in Google that took part in the trial. But the idea being that this tells us not only where people are cycling around Dublin, but also the road surface quality and near misses. So you can see on the left-hand side there at the end of Barrow Street, just outside the construction site for Boland's Mill, the poor road surface quality is each of those blue dots. So that's obviously an area that Dublin City Council are aware of, but there are other areas around Dublin that they aren't aware of. So what we're trying to do is map the poor road surface quality around Dublin, so they are the areas that can be fixed quicker for cyclists and to try and improve cycling infrastructure in the city. Another project then is with VT Networks. So life rings in Dublin City, there's about 130 of them, and about 30 to 35 of them go missing every week. Mostly due to stag and hen do's apparently. Most of them, the guy who manages this for Dublin City Council gets calls from hotels all the time, especially on a Monday morning, to say we have 5 life rings in our wardrobe. Do you want to come and take them? Although that, that is not ideal. If they are taken off the hooks or out of the casing, Dublin City Council can't redeploy them because they can't guarantee the integrity of them. And if they are thrown into the Liffey, there's obviously problems around contamination and leaving them back out there, so they have to replace them. So 35 of them going missing every week isn't ideal. There's also a team of people that walk around every few days to check what's missing. They then go back and report what's missing. They order them in, and then they have to deploy them. So life rings could be missing for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. So what we're trying to do is deploy sensors on the life ring so that we know when they've been taken. So instead of the process of going to check, back, order and deploy, we know that they will be missing and they can be replaced much faster. Another event, and you may have seen the coverage, and hopefully you did, on RTE of our driverless shuttle. So it was Ireland's first ever driverless shuttle. We decided to bring this to the Docklands. Again, the Docklands being the test bed for new technology, to showcase what it's like to get in a shuttle or a car or whatever it might be when there's no steering wheel, no driver, and it starts to navigate its way along the river. This was just an example of what it looks like, what it feels like. There are a lot of regulatory issues we have to overcome before these will be anywhere near the roads in Dublin, but we've just submitted a bid to Interreg to deploy one of these in the UCD campus, hopefully for 6 months to do trials and tests to try and understand and inform the regulatory piece in Ireland. We're hosting some 20 games in the Euro 2020 Championships in Dublin. So 4 of the championships will actually be across 12 countries in 2020, rather than just one country. Dublin will be one of the host cities. We host 4 games in the Aviva. So we're part of a pan-European project to look at fan experience and the 2 different fan routes. And what we know in Dublin is that if Ireland, and hopefully they will make it, but if they don't make it, we could have 2 rival sets of fans at the games here. And what we will need to do then is segregate the fans going to the stadium. So there'll be 2 separate fan routes. And what we want to do is have some kind of maybe AR system where you could scan your ticket. It could bring you, based on what fan you are, the right route through town, through an augmented reality line, and it'll bring you in the right entrance to the stadium so that fans don't cross paths. And the last one I'll touch on today, this is an aerial shot of Dublin. For those of you who know Dublin, it'll look like a nice aerial shot. For those of you who don't, for those of you who do, will realise that some of these buildings haven't been built yet. The buildings that I highlight there are actually all 3D models. So the reason I show this, we became aware of a company that were building models for this type of purposes. So it was for, as it's been highlighted this morning, most of these things start for marketing purposes. This was for NAMA to show the new XO building in Dublin. But we realised that it was the same guy building the same models for most of these sites, and what he decided to do was stitch this up, working with Maynooth University into a district model, and we deployed it in an AR and VR environment. So this is what the model looks like. because of this model, then realised that this could be of benefit to Dublin City Council and the Smart City team. And as has been again discussed this morning, a lot of things, a lot of this, the digital twin element to things is very important. So what we want to use this for potentially going forward is planning decisions in Dublin, or what we could use it for is telecoms planning as well. A lot of this connectivity needs line of sight, and if this model is extremely accurate, so using this type of model for telecoms planning. We actually put a tender out recently to buy a model of part of Dublin City. The tender closed a couple of weeks ago, and we'll be announcing who was successful in that in the next couple of weeks. But the idea of this model will be Dublin City Council will buy it, and it'll be open source then for anyone to do anything on top of. So we've had suggestions of zombie games in Dublin Docklands, and telecoms planning and everything in between. So hopefully the model will be available to everyone in this room at some point next year. So engagement, I'll finish on then. We have two sides of engagement with communities and engagement with the market. There we are. So we decided 18 months ago to get a bit of an understanding of the projects that we have in the Docklands, and we realised we were doing a lot with the tech and startup community and a lot with universities and research centres, but not a lot with communities and not a lot with business owners. So we decided to run a number of workshops. These are the different groups we broke it down into. So infrastructure, physical infrastructure, so people involved in roadways, waterways, traffic, the different things within Dublin City Council, Waterways Ireland, etc. Hospitality and tourism is a big thing in the Docklands. We have the 3 Arena, which is our biggest indoor concert venue. We have the convention centre, which is the National Convention Centre. We have museums, hotels, etc. So hospitality and tourism. We then have residents with two different sizes of the residents groups in the Docklands. We have communities on Pierce Street and on Sheriff Street that traditionally worked in the docks and have been there for a couple of hundred years. And then we have the new community of people who work in Google and Accenture. They have very different needs and very different requirements. So working with both of them. And also developers and property owners. So as I've mentioned, there was a huge amount of investment in the area between now and 2025. We're working with these guys to try and understand, obviously the 3D modelling and the BIM modelling is important, but also the telecoms planning. And a lot of, I suppose they were the most sceptical group coming into the room, but when they started to realise that if their building is one of the first that's 5G enabled, and if they can have the gigabit speed free Wi-Fi outside their building, then the value rental and resale can go up. But the idea of these workshops, groups, we run 6 workshops, been 150 attendees and facilitated by Deloitte, Accenture and Fjord. The idea being the first 30 minutes was explaining smart cities and why it's of relevance to the people in the room. So for residents, if they have dockless bikes outside their door, they have new modes of transport, go-car and different things. But also for the property developers understanding the 5G and the connectivity piece. So bringing, I suppose, making people aware of different technologies that can impact the way they live and work. But the idea was, after we made them aware of that, 90 minutes, tell us all of your problems. So everything that you're aware of in the Docklands, living there, working there, so that we know that if we're deploying new technology, it's not just being deployed for the sake of it, that problem actually exists. So we now have a list of over 300 challenges, which we're working through. There's a lot on mobility, there's different things on connectivity, on safety, there's different things. Not everything will be driven by Dublin City Council, some of it will be research, some of it the guards will be involved in, different things, but we know that these problems actually exist and we can start to try and improve them. And then engagement with the market then to try and find the solutions. So the program that we have and that we use is called SBIR, it's Small Business Innovation Research. It's an innovative procurement model. It's challenge-based procurement, so it's for public sector. Dublin City Council then part 50% funded and Enterprise Ireland 50% funded. We're now working with 42 companies on the 9 challenges listed on the board there. So cycling, flooding, wayfinding, mobility hubs, last mile delivery, etc., etc. And we've issued 1.5 million worth of funding to those companies. So it's great for us that we can now work with smaller companies and try to understand, that's where a lot of the innovation happens, and to try to understand what products they're using and where they want to test it, and then give them locations to trial and test in the city. So to finish up then, just kind of the 6 steps to get it to getting to where we are within Smart Docklands: setting up the leadership and governance, getting the funding in place from Dublin City Council and from the research side of things, getting a baseline of the connectivity, understanding the activity then that we have and the projects that existed in the Docklands, running the stakeholder workshops to try and understand where the problems lie with the people that live and work there, building the brand and keeping Smart Docklands associated with the wider Smart Dublin brand, that we are a test bed and a subset within Smart Dublin. And then now we're looking at a lot of data governance and new business models. And I'm just going to finish up very briefly on a video which is other people explaining the project and giving you a bit of background on it.
The basic idea is to use the Docklands to demonstrate how the application of digital technology and big data can meet city challenges, drive transformation in the provision of public services, and improve the quality of life for those who work in, live in or visit the Docklands.
We felt that our technology wasn't getting to market fast enough, and Dublin was our answer. It is European Tech Hub. It's a perfect place for us to come and test that technology.
There's really focused activity around smart digital connectivity, really making this Docklands stand out as really quite specialist.
It's fabulous. There's great companies, great collaborations, really, really good. But again, on the FIDC.
So many other cities might be talking about doing smart city projects. A little project going on over here, something going on over there. But Dublin, it seems to be all trying to pull in the same direction. So I'm really impressed with the sensors, with the bikes, people, the 3D model, really making this Docklands stand out as really quite specialist.
But I think what we've done is we've set the foundations for some world-leading innovation on our doorstep.
It's this density of companies in one small space that led us to create a Docklands IoT network. The city and the connectivity with vital ingredients to drive more innovation to Dublin.
Guys, stop talking about 10 years down the line. Let's just do stuff, drive activity.
If you think about why we built a connected building in the first place, it was to inspire our people. That building is one of our global innovation centers. And when you think about how do you think and develop innovation, it really starts by providing an environment where people can be innovative and succeed. That plus also the ability to test out things. So I think the district provides that capability to us. Dublin is really now on the map. When you stand side by side with Dubai, and you're shortlisted to be City of the Year at Barcelona Smart City Expo, it goes back to the people that really are working on it.
That's a brief overview of Smart Docklands. As I said, we are the Smart City testbed. What we want to do is trial and test as much technology as possible. So if anybody today has any technology that they would like to test in the Docklands, please have a chat with me after, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Thanks very much.